Welcome back to the Pathfinders podcast. I'm your host, Pete Schramm, founder and CEO of Latitude. But we're not here to talk about me or the business today. We're here to talk about people's career maps and their personal board of advisors. Yes, welcome back to Pathfinders, navigating your career map with a personal board of advisors. We're going to talk about some really cool people's interesting career journeys along the way. The past, the present, the future. And we're going to talk about the folks that help them get there, those multiple mentors building up their personal board of advisors. Amazing guest here today, so please make sure to engage, comment. This will be posted on podcasting platforms, Spotify, Apple, and then on LinkedIn. So please make sure to give a follow and a comment as you're listening through. So without further ado, the favorite quote of our guest today: how can we deal with people who claim to love America, but clearly hate Americans? Richard Citrin is a psychologist, author, and business consultant passionate about helping individuals and business leaders discover what's next in their lives and careers. Drawing on decades of experience in resilience, leadership, and healthcare leadership, Richard blends clinical expertise with business acumen to empower people navigating transitions, whether growing an idea, redefining life transitions, or building a leadership brand. Through his Substack series, What's Next? Engaging workshops, and personal and organizational advisory services, Richard inspires clarity, courage, and action for what's ahead. I'm going to add this in there. It's not on his bio. He's the real deal. Anytime we have a conversation, I'm learning something from him. Anytime you see him, he greets you with a smile. Anytime I can listen to him up on the stage, I'm like, geez, oh man, I need more and more of this guy. We'll talk about his book a little bit here today. And before we bring him up on stage, who knows how he may arrive whenever he does show his face here. He is an improv artist, storytelling, dancing, and singing. Without further ado, Richard, come on down.
Hey, Pete, great to be with you. Thanks for that intro. I love that guy. It sounds like he'd be really, really interesting to talk to.
He's a pretty cool guy. He's, a bit of a traveler, very detail oriented, but also people focused. And I'm curious where it all started. If you by chance knew this fellow, Richard, what do you think he wanted to be when he was growing up?
Well, the interesting thing about that, Pete, I would say, is that I was a very lazy kid.
Oh, okay. Not much has changed. Got it.
I was mostly into hanging out and being with my buds and playing sports and watching TV. I was not really a particularly strong student or a good student or focused on anything. And I think it's a very interesting generational thing. I think I wanted to be a stockbroker. That was what my father did. And I really enjoyed the fast pace and the relationships and everything else. However, my father, because of our Jewish descent, was not able to get into medical school when he applied for that education. There was a quota on how many people you allow in, and Jews were not necessarily welcome. This was in the late 30s.
Okay.
A difficult time. So my father wanted his children, his three sons, to be professionals, doctors.
Yeah.
My oldest brother is a neuroradiologist. My other brother is a dentist. And this is a great career story. So I went to college my freshman year at Ohio State down the road, and I nearly flunked out taking, chemistry and biology. And when I took organic chemistry, I had no idea what they were talking about. I had a 1.7 GPA my freshman year. That summer, I went to see a career counselor.
Yeah.
And she said, one of the things I know about you is you love dealing with people. You're going to be a residential advisor. People come to your room and hang out. Have you ever thought about going into psychology? I said, no, I have to be a doctor. That was kind of the expectation.
Right.
Well, you can become a doctor as a psychologist. And so I started looking into it, started taking classes, and sure enough, I started getting A's and B's. I graduated, my grade point was about 3.3 after a disastrous first year. So I learned such an important lesson, which is when it comes to career, it's really important to go with what you're good at.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
And that is, to me, has always been kind of a guiding mission for me in my own career path and also with people I work with.
So at no point you decided to leave Ohio State and go to Penn State where the smarter people go. You stayed over there across the border.
Uh, yeah, because we were winning football championships.
Ohio State does win a lot. I do have to hand it to you. So upon graduation, you said, okay, I'm figuring out a little bit of this people stuff. Thank you to that career counselor along the way. Psychology. What kind of roles were you applying to? What did you want to do with your life at that point?
Well, of course, I went to graduate school.
Mhm. Did you do that right away, or did you take a little bit of time?
Again, it's kind of a different generation. It's not, back when I was, making that transition, there was no gap year.
Uh-huh.
You just keep going. And that was, again, parental expectations were driving a lot of what I did. And I think a lot of people my age did this kind of boomer expectation. And I wish, of course, that I had given myself more flexibility. But, the truth of it was, that you have an expectation, you're working to fulfill it. The message is, work hard now, and then it's going to reap rewards later on. And
Yeah.
certainly was correct elements about it. I think the downside was I missed opportunities when I was younger to explore expectations. But I never regret. I don't hold regrets.
Yeah.
My life has been really blessed, and I've had an amazing career. I like to think we think about PBAs, and I was thinking my first PBA was my eighth grade teacher, Mrs. Nalvin, my social studies,
Yeah.
who told me, listen, and I was getting the highest grades in the class, and I had done this essay on some historical faction, and I was perfect. She gave me a 99. I said, Miss Nalvin, why did you give me a 99? This should be 100. She said, well, there's always more than you could have written about. So you always have to remember there's always more you can do. And what a great message that was for me to kind of gain that sense of understanding. In graduate school, of course, you have a personal board of advisors because you form a committee around your thesis and dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose different people somebody who could push me, somebody else who was a knowledge expert in my space, somebody else who was a statistics maven because I wasn't. So you find people who, in that regard, were very helpful for me in completing that task, which, again, for a lazy person was a bit challenging.
Now, do you think that it would be more impactful and valuable for you if you would say, hey, I go to undergrad a couple of years, I go into the workforce year or two, and then back to grad school? Or, obviously you can't go back and do it again. But, for business school, I think that can be really helpful for things that are more technical, right? I did mechanical engineering, undergrad, grad school. I think for that, it was helpful for me to go straight through. But, not all experiences and degrees and programs are created equal.
Yeah, I think in this profession, it's better to just go straight in.
Straight through. Okay.
Any experiences you're going to get in a hospital setting or in a corporate setting, you're going to be so low on the totem pole that it's not going to be experience that's going to help you drive to success. It's not going to help you get into graduate school, for example.
Okay.
But I agree with you about the work side of it. I subsequently, 25 years later, I got my MBA after I was in business, and that was very helpful for me in my career at that time. But doing in a healthcare field, I think just get it over with. I mean, it takes a
Yeah.
long, so proceed as quickly as you can.
So let's talk a little bit about your career map, right? So one of the columns on the career map talks about education and certification. So you get out of grad school and you figure out, okay, what am I going to do from here? Where am I going to go? What's that what do those professional stepping stones look like for me? So talk through a little bit of what your plan was. And maybe it was just, hey, I got to get a job, right? Maybe start working my way towards a, doctor. I need some more letters in front of my name to make dad happy. I want to go get an MBA at some point. I want to do my own bit. What did that initial career map start to look like for you at that point?
Yeah, there was a period of time when I'd finished my master's, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go into my doctorate. And I did push back and say, oh, just don't know if I want to endure another 6 years, five
Hmm.
school. And the message, not just from my parents at that point, but from my fiance, my friends, my advisors were, hey, if you want to do that, do that. Just understand that you're going to be working for people who are stupider than you are. And if you want to work for people who are dumb, then go ahead and just don't finish up your career. Don't finish up this degree because you know you're just not going to find it satisfactory,
Yeah.
or professionally to do that. So that was a very convincing argument that I got from a lot of people. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I do get frustrated with people who I don't think are using their full capacity.
Mhm.
And that was when I started to recognize, I need to take more control of this myself,
Yeah.
rely on others. I think it's very interesting. I think we've had so much controversy these days around education, the role of education, and the democratization of everything, whether it be healthcare or business or travel, whatever. Everybody has access to the same information, so everybody's a bit of an expert. So, I used to call restaurants and say, "Hi, it's Dr. Citrin calling. Can I get a reservation?" They say, "Oh, yes, Dr. Citrin will get you in." I don't do that anymore. It's, "Hi, Richard Citrin. Can I, you know, can I get a
They
reservation?"
already know that you're a doctor, and they say that's Dr. Citrin to you.
I think it just doesn't carry the same weight. Think about when you go into your doctor. Last time you've had a physician visit. I'm always amazed. I walk in and a resident comes in and he says, "Hi, John Lewis. How are you?" I don't know why I picked that name, John Lewis, but whatever. And
Yeah.
then the doctor comes in and say, "Hi, I'm Peter Brzezinski." It's just everything is democratized, and I think that's
Yeah.
good. So I think certifications, and I've got an MBA. I've got certifications in different clinical and mostly professional areas. I think, however, they are less important than the experiences that we gain and how we position ourselves professionally to be on a constant learning map.
Yeah.
So in the learning map that you have, in the career map that you have, you talk about skills and tools.
Hmm.
And to me, that is the critical area because I think a lot of people don't have the skills required to do the work that they want to do. And I don't necessarily mean the technical skills. I mean, you were trained as a mechanical engineer.
Hmm.
You understood how to be a mechanical engineer, but were you trained in how to provide customer relations
Heck no.
or how to, look at a balance sheet?
Well, I did an accounting minor, but so I was, but most were not.
Yeah, you took that initiative to do that.
Hmm.
When I was in my corporate career here at UPMC, in one of the business divisions, I had trouble the navigating influence within the
Yeah.
organization. I went to my boss and I said to her, I think I could use some coaching or some help on doing this. I can't having trouble. Uh, I'm usually pretty influential. It's one of my strengths, relationship skills. But I was having some trouble navigating. I think in part because I was an outsider. I wasn't from Pittsburgh.
Hmm.
So, I think I could use some coaching or some help. And her response was, at this level, I expect you to know how to do those things. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you. I'll work on it. But you don't learn, sometimes you just need some modeling or some ideas from other people to prompt thinking and really more than prompt thinking to develop the skill that's required when you're an outsider trying to navigate a very tightly knit community and people who've known each other for 20 years. And what's
Yep.
what's the best way to navigate that? Uh,
So let's go back into the middle phases there. So we wrap up grad school. You say, "Hey, I did undergrad, master's, doctorate program. Okay, cool." You mentioned that you went to UPMC. Was that your first stepping stone after you finished, or where'd you go, kind of in between
yeah,
there? Talk to us about how you selected that first job. And it's really interesting how we, kind of share for the listeners here about, okay, here's what was important to me in that first job. Obviously, you have a lot of education, so you got to figure out something to pay off the bills, right? So
Right.
that's one aspect of it. And then pretty soon after, we'll talk about at some point it makes sense to switch companies. And so we'll dive into that right after this one.
Yeah. Well, let me give you a quick rundown. I followed my wife down to Texas Christian University, TCU, in Fort Worth, where she had gotten a teaching position.
Hmm.
And our family went. I had three stepchildren at that point, and I took a position in the counseling center at TCU, primarily because the next step after you get a doctorate is you got to get licensed,
You're right.
and license required, X number of hours of clinical work. And I wanted to develop the expertise of becoming really an excellent clinician. So I just worked my butt off at that counseling center for 5 or 6 years to really master my skills, which I felt like I did, and that I am kind of a master therapist and clinician in those regards. And then I moved into private practice. I opened my own little private practice. But the direction of healthcare at that time was to think about, particularly in behavioral health,
Hmm.
was to try to aggregate groups together as opposed to just being single providers all over, because the managed healthcare companies wanted to work with groups rather than individuals, just more efficient. So we formed what became the largest behavioral healthcare group in the Southwest.
Wow.
We had about 25 clinicians working with us. That included psychiatrists, social workers, psychologists, movement therapists, breath therapists. We had everything that was kind of in the middle and on the edges. It was a very exciting time, and we did that for 10 years, but the market really shifted as managed care came in.
Yep.
And when they came to us and said, listen, we need to reduce your fee, but we're going to send you more referrals. I didn't have my MBA yet at that time, but I knew that would be a path to losing money. If you send me more people, but to drop my fees, I'm going to lose more money.
Yeah.
So I was able to use my influencing skills to approach a investment group about purchasing our practice as a model for purchasing other behavioral healthcare clinics around the country. It's very common today in healthcare. Doctors work for hospitals or healthcare systems. 20 years ago, it wasn't. There were group practices that were forming. And so I was able to influence and get this investment group to buy our company, which they did. And we went to work for them. They owned a national behavioral healthcare company. We worked for them. And that was where I got involved in my corporate role. Oversee wellness, employee assistance, other behavioral healthcare services that I did. And I did that for 7 years until that company was near an acquisition by Humana, who eventually,
Hmm.
we decided at that point it was time to move to Fort Worth, or move from Fort Worth. So I sent out my resume and spoke to some recruiters and had a call from them about coming up to UPMC. And so we had never been here. We took a flyer and came up, had a great time, loved it. People were great, beauty all over the place. And we made a decision. We said, hey, you know what? We would go somewhere on a new adventure just to see what it's like. And so that was what we did. And we've been here over 20 years now.
Absolutely remarkable. And I know the PHRA community is so grateful to have you here, your wife, absolutely awesome people. Ask Richard about a lot of the food spots, coffee spots. He can share some good ideas with you. We can touch a little bit on the book and some of the things you've done with Michael. But it's just been absolutely great to have such a phenomenal resource. And also, let's give a couple of moments here to brag about your wife's work, right? As well. Anytime I talk to him, he's like, hey, I'll give you my updates, but I got to brag about somebody, my boss over here that I got to, answer the phones for from time to time. So I think that's pretty fantastic. Before we get into the bragging points here, I want to talk a little bit about the piece you mentioned, right? Behavioral health, right? The world's changed in the last 5 years.
Mm.
This isn't part of the script. This isn't part of any of the things we talked about before, the preparation. But I think this is something that's really important to think about. This loneliness issue that we're facing, right? What is it? The Surgeon General said that loneliness has similar health impacts of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Last time I checked, that's not super great.
No.
So what's going on with our behavioral health? And you can, take a couple of different directions with this, but especially with the kids that, were students in COVID, they weren't there. How's that changing? How these little buzzers in our pocket, right? How that's changing everything. Can you just shed some light on that, please, and drop some knowledge on us?
Yeah, good, great question, Pete. And what I want to say a couple of things about that. First of all, I believe that it's going to take a decade to get over COVID.
Mm.
Impact of those 2 years of a million people dying and other people, obviously, uh, not in the workplace, not at school, particularly for young people, is going to take a long time for the healing to occur and for there to be more kind of recovery from that, their resilience of that particular theme. What I'm very grateful for is that COVID has brought the issue of behavioral mental health and wellness to the forefront.
Yeah.
I have been advocating for this as most mental health workers have for the past 30 years. Hey, this is really important. We need to not have this be behind the curtain, but bring this out and allow people to talk about things like depression, anxiety, and how those affect us. 20 years ago, if I brought up in the workplace, and I did, a theme of, listen, I'd like to talk to your managers. I think we need to work more on recognition, on acknowledging what people do well.
Yeah.
My focus is around strengths. The response typically is, I don't really care about that. What I want to make sure is that people get their work done. And if I have to be an SOB to do it, then I'll do it. Well, maybe you should consider. No, I'm not going to consider something else. They don't like it. They can leave. Today, that's not the message at all.
Right.
They are aware of it. They're evaluated on it. Performance expectations are set in that regard. They're part of the skill requirements for leadership.
Yeah.
Several organizations that I work with. So I think the great thing is that it is changing. We're seeing more recognition about it. Now, I will tell you, I think there's a downside to that, which is that there is a large concern among many behavioral health care practitioners around the kind of institutionalization of trauma.
Oh.
I think what I mean by that is that I've written this book on resilience, as you know, and I speak on this topic of resilience. And all the research I've done professionally and personally tells me that people are pretty resilient as a general rule, and Americans even more so because we have so many blessings associated with our country and our world. And so our ability to bounce back from many things, I think, are built into us. They don't have to be built. They don't have to be developed. They are already part of who we are as beings.
Yeah.
Survival instinct. And so, when I hear somebody who, has a professor at school who says something that bothers them, they say they don't feel safe, they feel traumatized. I think we've allowed that to become a little bit more than it really needs to be. And my mission in working with people in the workplace when I hear that is to say, let's talk about your strengths. Let's talk about your resilience. I don't want to focus on what's not working. I want to focus on what is working. And there are obviously people who are truly traumatized.
You're right.
I serve on the board of the Women's Center and Shelter.
Yeah.
So I understand, that people are truly traumatized. And if you're in an abusive relationship, that's traumatic. But if your boss tells you that, he needs or she needs for you to work late or get some work done this weekend, that's not a trauma. That's, maybe a disappointment. It may be an aggravation. Trauma is a very strong word to use. And I think a lot of people think of their lives as being traumatic. So I think, as always is the case, we swing from one end to the other.
Yeah.
And I think that's the concern I have. With younger people, I think there is a little more risk to it. And I want to say that I want to give them credit. I know a lot of young people, they're amazing. I mean, they're smart, they're knowledgeable, they're good with their skills, they're ambitious. I'm really hopeful about this generation of teenagers. And my great granddaughter is 12 years old, and she's in a dance performance this weekend, and she's awesome. You know,
Yeah.
has ideas about what she wants to do in the world, and she works hard and she's smart. She gets good grades. I mean, now she'll probably get a face tattoo when she's 17, but we'll do with that then.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. I think about the comment there on trauma, and somebody says that to me. Wow, I was traumatized. I say, okay, maybe you were. Let's just help me understand a little bit more because I don't know as much about what you're going through. How do you define trauma? Okay. Have you ever needed to go to a level one, level two, level three trauma center for this bit you are traumatized for? Because they're the people that take care of it.
Yeah, it's great.
Right.
Great.
And I don't know if it goes up to three or four or five, but I thought there was at least three. So you'd probably know. But I
Yeah,
think that's an interesting piece. And so to meet people where they are, maybe, the pendulum was, the whole way this way before, and maybe it's swung the whole way back. But let's do our best to try and, get it a little bit closer to the middle. I coach high school basketball. One of the things I say to the kids often, mentally and physically as well, you guys got to toughen up. You got to, there's a big aspect of opportunity for improvement. And I think the piece that you shared there about, another, what is that, 5 years of recovery,
right.
still work in progress here. So it's important. Richard, we've got a couple more things to talk about here. If you could, for just a moment, talk a little bit about the work that you do now, and then, maybe it's a good opportunity to give a shout out to your wife's work as well.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, I was at UPMC, and after 5 years there, my position was eliminated.
Mhm. You're so good you worked yourself out of a job. Not everybody can say they did that. Congratulations.
Yeah, I think it was also related to not fully developing that skill at influencing and being as much of a change agent. Although I did some really cool change agent things that I'm very proud of there. But when I got riffed, I freaked out a little bit, of course. But then over the course of about a year, I put together a personal board of advisors
Yep. Yep.
that really made a tremendous difference in my life professionally. And some of it, to be perfectly honest, was with my mentor, who's the brilliant guy, and there was I paid for some of those services,
Yeah.
so I didn't mind that at all. And because I consider it an investment in myself.
100%.
So the last dozen years or so have been around leadership coaching, leadership development, resilience work in organizations, and really advisory and strategy work with senior leaders has really been my focus for the past dozen years or so. And I've written a lot around resilience because I wrote a book. I've had some traumatic personal experiences with resilience, to be perfectly honest. I think you may or may not know this, Pete, but my wife and I lost two adult children.
Mhm.
Our son died of AIDS, uh, and then 5 years later, our daughter died of breast cancer at 42 with three children. So those were, I would consider those to be traumatic experience for us. And yet we made the decision to survive our relationship and to work on that. And that really has helped me to see the capability of what people can do. Sheila took that work. She was a social worker, but also a professional dancer early in her career.
Mhm.
Continues to dance every day, and she became a grief advocate. So she has
Yeah.
books on grief. One telling the story of Ken and Corrine, and others who she helped deal or helped support in their crossing. And the second book that she wrote is The Art of Grieving, which is about how we use the arts to grieve. And if you have, and unfortunately, we all will have the experience of going to a funeral service, and you'll notice when you go into a church or a synagogue that it's all art. People
Yeah.
people tell stories. People read poetry. It's all art, and the arts are what we use to help us grieve, and we don't recognize that. And so Sheila is on a journey to kind of demonstrate to people that grief is something we can learn from and not something we have to be afraid of.
Learning opportunity indeed. What was it? I did a session yesterday. It's false expectations appearing real, fear, or face everything and rise. And so it's just that opportunity of and what we do with it. And I think there's you can be pissed off, you can be sad, you can be frustrated. But what I like, I've been in situations where I, miss a free throw at the end of the basketball game and we lose the game. Right. I was pretty down. You lose a loved one out of a relationship, something bad happens at work. You're just like, son of a gun. And I feel like I'm a pretty strong person, but I can tell whenever I'm just beat down, I say, okay, sometimes you just need to have that a little bit. But once the clock gets to midnight, all right, we got to be able to move forward. We're never going to forget, but I use it for me, right? It's different for everybody. How to channel that fuel for the fire, right? Pour that on and say, gosh, as if we can understand why or how that happened, we're ready for it. How can we band together, right? That's a great time to leverage a couple of those different board seats, right? Personally, professionally, as we keep moving forward. So congrats to you, to Sheila. And then, we won't dive in as much on the nonprofit and community work that you do, but, again, to the listeners, Richard, Sheila, they walk the walk and talk the talk in the office, out of the office, around the region. I still don't know if we've converted them away from being an Ohio State fan, but hey, we can't all be perfect. And so life does go on.
Appreciate that, Pete. I appreciate your work. And Penn State, gosh, golly gee, they almost got there this year.
Yeah, they got close to getting close.
That's pretty good. All right, you gotta build it up 1 year at a time.
If only it was horseshoes, right? So the next question here, Richard, is around at an organization, right? You've worked with organizations of all sizes in a couple of different industries, and you've also worked with leaders at varying levels and different tenures, different parts of their career, and so on. So this concept of a career map for each of our employees, this concept of more than one mentor, multiple mentors, building a personal board of advisors for each of our employees, where do you see the value of this inside a company?
Pete, that's all of what my work is with organizations. It's around helping people develop. And although I work with senior leaders, I've also worked with entry level people. Everybody wants to advance. And again, it gets back to this idea of, do you have the skills? Let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
Do you have the knowledge and competencies to affect the change that you want to do? And in most cases, people don't. They don't know how to make a career decision. They don't have something like your job map, your career map. I do a lot of work in careers, and people don't really have a concept of how you develop and strengthen and improve your career and advance your career. On the other side, managers, leaders who take an interest in that from their employees and aren't afraid of it, they actually support and advocate for them, find out that, of course, employees become more loyal.
Yeah.
But they're so grateful that there's somebody who takes a personal interest in them. And so a manager who says, listen, let's talk about your career, and we're not just going to talk about it once a year.
Right.
Because my colleague Mike Couch and I wrote a book called Strategy Driven Leadership. And I think one of the important takeaways of that book is that the opportunities for career development, for leadership skills, for work performance don't happen every 6 months or once. They happen every day.
Right.
The opportunity for you to improve your career, there's an opportunity for that today, whether it's completing a task effectively, working on influencing, whether it's helping a colleague out. There's a million. Everything we do helps to build that recognition, that brand, and really our capabilities. So you take on a challenge. That's something you missed that free throw. Well, why was that? What happened? How do I change it? And you know what? You're going to miss free throws in the future. So those mistakes are going to happen. And how do we try to get closer to to the success that we want. I don't want to say perfection, but to the success that we're looking to.
Yeah, I think it's a big one. Richard, I'm getting ready to go through just a short recap here. Any closing comment that you want to share with the listeners and the audience before I go through?
Yeah, I think I want to emphasize the notion again that skill development.
Hmm.
Oh, one of the questions you said was about what's your favorite book, and I want to show you I don't know if it's my favorite book, but it's one of the most important books that I use.
Yeah.
Well, For Your Improvement
Oh, by Corn. Okay.
by Corn Ferry, and it lists the research that they have around the 38 most important skills or competencies required for success at work. And if I had this book, if my manager had given me this book 20 years ago, I probably would still be at UPMC.
Really? Okay, that's a new one for me.
I give this book to clients, and I'll tell you, Pete, I have people who I gave it to a dozen years ago, and when I talk to them on the phone or we do a Zoom, they say, "Oh," but I say, I see your FYI on the shelves there." I say, "Oh yeah, I used it this morning with somebody," because it helps people to see and describes what it is to be effective in
Yeah.
decision making. What is somebody who's ineffective in decision making? What is somebody who's super skilled in decision making? And
Yeah.
not a strength, and you need it. Here's a dozen ways to develop it. And so it creates an intentionality for people. And I think, all honesty, I think the work that you do and the products and services you provide fit in perfectly for that because your system creates an automation around how people can do that, how people can connect, how they can talk about these things, and provides data.
Yeah.
See, this is where I'm making a difference and improving. So I think it's really a beautiful connection between the two.
Well, thank you very much. And Richard, thank you for joining us today. Recently back from holiday down in St. Martin's,
Mhm.
ever active in the community, and Mr. Courageous, as they say with the first name.
Yeah.
But you were lazy as a kid, aspirations of following the fatherly footsteps as a stockbroker. Ohio State started off with a 1.7 GPA, and after that first semester, you said, "I need to go talk to somebody." That career counselor led you to psychology. He gave us the advice to go with what you're good at. PBA seat number 1, filled by that 8th grade teacher, giving the advice that there's always more you can do, even if it's a little frustrating. Your academic board guided you and through the process in grad school. You deliberated with others and then went on to the doctorate and then an MBA a couple decades later. You shared the story of the frustrations and skills that you had whenever you were greeted as a geographical outsider, right? They already expected you to have some of these things, but as you continue to master the skills of therapy as a clinician, you're down at TCU in Texas, followed the wife down there. And, kudos to you, pat on the back, high five, largest behavioral health group in American Southwest. Let's go. Got acquired. Proof is in the pudding. Corporate role for 7 years. And then you left Fort Worth, right? Welcome to Pittsburgh, UPMC. We did take a little bit of a rabbit hole down talking about behavioral health, and I think it was necessary. We got another 5 years to recover from the impacts of COVID to our behavioral and mental health. We did leverage the opportunity to not waste good crisis, right? Let's think about that. It's being recognized now. But the downside you alluded to, institutionalized resilience and trauma, may be seen in different shapes and sizes, and sometimes out of proportion, perhaps. Around 2012, you said, "I'm going to focus on my own business, leadership, executive coaching, resilience, and building from some of your own personal hardships," right? Personal, professional. Your rock, Sheila, the dancer turned grief counselor. I love how you guys talk about art as a help, a guide on our grieving journey, a learning opportunity. Do you have the knowledge and competency to influence and make real the change you want to do? You told us that career development happens every day. For your improvement, the book, Great Insights, has today helped with our improvement. Thank you, Richard.
Wow, Pete, that is an amazing summary. I may call you. I think I want you to be my new AI chatbot.